Welcome back, Geekbeard here. Time for the second file of the day. We're reviewing my old diaries for the deep philosophical discussions that they often provoke. Let's get straight into it. Had a new concept of God yesterday evening. My idea was to decline to answer or get emotional about things that are difficult to answer and which I get emotional about sometimes, but instead punt them up to God. If he's omnipotent, then he should have no difficulty answering them. Rarely do I get a spoken answer in return, though. That's not the point. The point is to just avoid getting emotionally entangled in things. This is also nicer than one of the classic tactics, playing devil's advocate, telling myself that the opposite side may have some merit that can be somewhat distressing, as well as leave you undecided floating. Yeah, I'm a huge devil's advocate kind of guy, I'm afraid. That's just part of my personality that always comes to that always rises up. What's the word for it? Opposonto? That's not what my mum calls it. Just oppositional, conflictive. There's a really good word for it that I can't think of right now. That what's her name used in that movie? That Margot Robbie's character used in that movie. Vexatious. Vexatious. I am vexatious, and my brain is. It just it always wants to explore the opposite of what you say, and look at the possibility of that happening. It's a weird way of being. It's connected to my talent for logic and logical thinking, but because logical thinking is really enhanced by your ability to consider the opposite of a statement or the opposite idea. I think most people don't really think about that much, or their brain doesn't go there under most circumstances, or they don't let it happen. Because you can just sort of tie yourself up in knots rather than actually getting anywhere, because the opposite of something often does have some merit. I mean, we went through a massive government kind of hegemony in the form, intellectual hegemony in the form of the pandemic and the supposed civilization-ending powers of CV. I don't know whether I'm allowed to use trigger words on YouTube, but let it hereby be acknowledged that this is a sacred document protected by the power of the Fermat's last hexagon and the secret power of inbreeding. Bind! You see, YouTube cannot as easily just censor a sacred document. At least that's my thinking. So yes, people should play devil's advocate a little bit more and say, well, maybe the government doesn't 100% know what's best for our health and well-being. Even with all the supposed agreement of the mass of medical science, which I don't think there was complete agreement, but we had a single message shoved down our throats. Oh, you must do this. You must stay indoors. You must obey these rules. You must. Well, they didn't go quite so far as saying you must take the vaccine, but they kind of used as much pressure as reasonably possible. And I would say unreasonable, actually. Bind. Does God have time to consider minutiae of my life? Not really. But things like my career are not exactly minutiae. He ought to be able to find time to help me with those contemplations. This God stuff is pretty good. I want to elaborate, though this stuff should be sort of obvious. What I call God is essentially the entire universe, which of course includes ourselves, so we are also God. That explains why you can feel his presence at any time. Yet, God is also other/separate. It's a paradox. This is the kind of mainstream thing mainstream thinkers seem incapable of accepting. He is the paradoxical otherness / selfness, or separateness / unity. Lentils for lunch seemed to cause much flatulence last night, at least that's how I attribute it. Waiting. What can I possibly do that God would care about? Not much while I'm stuck here. I need to write log zksfasgg. Refer to the previous video if you want to know what that is. But it's hard, and I am lazy. If this God stuff helps at all, it's going to have to help with that somehow. The thing is, writing it all down isn't very fun. I've extensively regurgitated it through my mind. Let's try and create FFTs. FFT, if you've never heard of the term, stands for Fast Fourier Transform. And for a while, I thought that maybe my flat tensor product, which is a concept I came up with, and I discussed a little bit more in the previous video, check it out if you're interested, that maybe a FFT could be written as an FTP. A fast Fourier transform could be written as a flat tensor product, which the Hadamard transform can be done. It can be written as a flat tensor product, which is very nice. And that sort of could be used as one way of describing the possibility of a fast Hadamard transform. Unfortunately, there exists a fast Fourier transform, but I've not been able to find any way of writing it as a flat tensor product. And it doesn't seem possible to me. And that's what the next section is about, but we'll sort of skip over that because it's not very good conversation material. You're too much of an opposonto. We'll be relying on opposite-based thinking less now that I have God. But as long as I filter it through him, I think it's pretty valid. Just had to deal with some of the interstate Star Trek. Got annoyed that nothing felt different. Star Trek is just a mail delivery service in Australia. Part of Australia Post, I believe. Like I have mentioned in previous videos, I currently work in a mailroom, so I'm sorting and processing and opening and sealing to send or receive. Not a terribly stressful job, in fact a very unstressful job, which is where I get time to engage in all these philosophical musings and write these epic diaries, which are so fascinating to you, the listener, I'm sure. Just had to deal with some of the interstate Star Trek, got annoyed that nothing felt different. I suppose I'm trying to create a big separation with this new stuff. But if nothing feels any different, it's a bit depressing, I suppose. Do you guys ever experience that? Do you ever come up with any awesome philosophical ideas and then you try to keep them in your head for the rest of the day and think about them and process them while you're going about your work or whatever? Particularly work, but then realize that nothing seems to have changed. If nothing changes, then what's the point of having ideas to apply to your life and your mind in particular? Because philosophical ideas apply mostly to your mind, first and foremost anyway. Drop a comment if you relate, and I'll get back to you. Here we are at 12:20, back in the chair, finished lunch, etc. Once again face to face with manifest pesquiny, reprocht incalculably. Here I am playing games with my keyboard. Sigh. I want something amazing and profound to come with my free time, like it sort of used to back in the day, like during last Feb through April at least, and during PC. PC stands for Placiturn Chronicles, which was an epic series of stories I wrote, which maybe I'll share on this channel one day. They're stories about a very insular civilization which doesn't want alien contact or anything like that, and they kind of ignore it, even though they have very high-tech games and they have high-tech virtual reality, and the aliens actually try to connect to them through their virtual reality, just like aliens are probably doing with us right now. Who knows? But they don't really want it. They consider that a source of... They associate it with insanity. So they would probably think that somebody that claimed to have external communications with aliens was instead just insane. So not that different to Earth, really. But since then, not much epic writing has happened. Suppose I have refined my philosophical spiritual concepts somewhat successfully. 0721, quote, "Life is full of plenty of negatives," end quote. "And these are good for you / your mind." This is a very, very interesting concept. Is it good for your mind to experience negatives or downs? I think I wrote in another file, another time, that a lot of the structure of your mind is kind of built up from negatives, from bad sort of emotions of thinking, oh, if I don't do this, then I'll have to do this, and so on and so forth. And just like negative feelings, it's surprising how much of you kind of develops when you're under pressure, and there's a lot that can go wrong. So I don't know. I'm experiencing a bit of that right now, because I sort of feel under pressure over the course of the last 6. Well, I'm sort of in the middle of it. We'll talk about it more at a later date, I think. I'm very one-dimensional, aren't I? So I find it hard to recover the philosophical mental state that I was in when I wrote this stuff, now that I have my God thing. Well, this should help. 0720 and 0721, quote, "Run at one down. Had a pretty good moment where I accepted that all my negativities / responsibilities are what achieves memory. Having plenty of them is literally probably good for general mental health. But now we return to the vastness and emptiness of time. Harder on some level. Well, it's not unreasonable to think that such emptiness is a drain on mental health." End quote. Break. Quite a lot of jaw thrusting going on today. Maybe that's a good thing. I really don't want to be here. God just makes lying in bed, meditating, so much better even. I can listen to any kind of spiritual banter easily. God allows me to not get upset at it. Which is not to say that batting on about things like manifesting or total unity or the basics of quantum physics doesn't start to get irritating. If you've gotten into a sort of a spiritual vein on YouTube, you would notice that those are very popular topics. You know, I don't know how many times I can hear about the amazing double slit experiment without it starting to drive me insane, and how it has profound consequences for the way you see the entire world. Well, maybe it does, but there's only so many times you can absorb that. Law of One, Book 3, page 69, session 61. Unmanifested Self. There was something about that in yesterday's browsings also. Maybe it was Unmanifested Man. Yes, I'm reading Law of One, rather than hiking it to Donut King, which is what I probably ought to do. So, any of you guys heard of Law of One? It's pretty interesting stuff. Hit me up in the comments if you have, and we can talk about it. But I am somewhere deep in book 4 of Law of One, or The Law of One, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, I'm not going to lie. I don't think I have a clear sort of mental track through it all. Maybe I've just forgotten the core ideas as I've been proceeding, and so it's sort of my fault. Maybe some genius out there could read the whole thing and absorb all the core ideas and proceed through it and make sense of it all and have the feeling that it all does make sense, which to me it does not. I've got to say I'm impressed by the questioners and how they seem to have, whatever they're doing, I don't know what they're doing. I don't get it, I'll be honest. There's very little of it that I can remember. You know, I liked some of the stuff about like yellow ray, red ray, the different colors, the different octaves, the different notes or tones, kind of defining this progression, this upgrading through the densities, and we're currently 3rd density, moving on to 4th density through something called the harvest, which sounds scary to me. If you use that word, you've got to be prepared for the connotations. Words have connotations, and that's important. You can deceive people with words as well. And I think Law of One's harvest could very easily be a deception. Anyway, that's probably enough of that for now. Enough to sink your teeth into if you really want to talk about that. We've got a little bit more to go. And I think this is a bit of a story. We'll see how it goes. Ben Trance, monk of an ancient modern order. The gigantic cathedral doors were open enough for a shard of warmth to land upon him. He entered. Comment. I want to write about my new philosophy, beings that have gained supreme confidence by their closeness with God. It seems as if I'm now trying to contemplate hard things, so that I can feel the God connection, which would be somewhat degenerate behavior. May meet that guy at Reed this morning. Silliness shall ensue. Don't be like your mother, calling everything silly. Sigh. Break. I will force God to take an interest in me by doing outrageous things. Okay, now back to another story. Garatevsky placed the bloodied scalpel carefully back down upon the white bed of foam. Suddenly his patient sat up vigorously in his bed and gripped his arm. He seemingly tried to speak aggressively, but was hampered by the blood and organs that dripped from his mouth. Hi, God. Where is your God now? Garatovsky uttered mercilessly. The man looked down, then up at him, forlorn, eyes popping out of his head in pain and the realization that he was dying. Suddenly, a beam of light pierced the miles of rock above them and impacted directly upon the man's core. Garrett withdrew, aghast. He observed the man's light body clamber out of his real body and merge with the beam of light, which then retracted upwards. There was a scorch mark on the ceiling, but no hole. Garrett still stood there with his hands over his face, seemingly paralyzed. Slowly he regained his composure. Looking in the mirror, however, his skin had been seared by the light beam and now looked as if he had aged 20 years. Now he was the sole actor upon the stage. Would Wayland Garatovsky, dark surgeon extraordinaire, accept the reality of God? His eyes were still popping out of his head in shock, especially as he felt forced to contemplate the choice in front of him. slumped and fell to his knees. The end. Well, I'm not going to offer too much commentary or interpretation of that. It sort of stands on its own. And I think we've about finished the episode here. I think I've plumbed most of the depth that I wanted to get to. And if there's any additional depths or additional ideas you have, please leave like, comment, subscribe, etc. Get in contact in any way of your choosing. But that's about it for this episode, so thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.